The Battle of Batoche was the decisive battle of the Northwest Rebellion, which pitted the Canadian authorities against a force of insurrectionist Métis, fought from May 9 to May 12, 1885, at the ad hoc Provisional Government of Saskatchewan capital of Batoche. The greater numbers and superior firepower of General Frederick Middleton's force could not be successfully countered by the Métis, as had happened at the earlier Battle of Fish Creek, and the town was eventually captured. The defeat of the Métis led to the surrender of Louis Riel on May 15 and the collapse of the Provisional Government. Over the next several weeks, Poundmaker would surrender and Cree fighters and families under Big Bear held out the longest, fighting off Canadian troops pursuing them in the Battle of Frenchman's Butte and Battle of Loon Lake, and gradually dwindling in number, staying on the move until Big Bear eventually turned himself into Mounties at Fort Carlton in early July. Early advances and the crippling of the Northcote, conscious of the numerous reverses that had been suffered by government forces in previous clashes with the rebels, Middleton approached Batoche with caution, reaching Gabriel's Crossing on the 7th of May and advancing within 8 miles of the town the following day. Middleton's plan rested on an encirclement strategy. His main contingent advanced directly against Métis' defensive lines. The steamboat Northcote, carrying some of Middleton's troops, would steam past the distracted defenders and unload 50 men at the rear of the town, effectively closing the pincer. However, due to the difficulty of the terrain and Middleton's penchant for prudence, his force lagged behind schedule, and when the Northcote appeared adjacent to the town on the 9th of May, it was spotted by Métis who had not yet come under artillery fire. The small arms fire did little damage to the armored ship, but they lowered Batoche's ferry cable, into which the Northcote steamed unsuspectingly, slicing off its masts and smokestacks. Crippled, the ship drifted harmlessly down the South Saskatchewan River and out of the battle. Mission Ridge. Ignorant of the Northcote's fate, Middleton approached the church at Mission Ridge on the morning of the 9th of May in order to bring his plan into effect. Some Métis in 2 houses south of the church began firing at Bolton's scouts, but artillery was brought up to shell the houses, one of which caught fire. The Métis sharpshooters fled toward the settlement. The troops advanced toward the church. The troops saw some people who were taken to be the enemy. Second Lieutenant Arthur L. Howard, a Gatling gun expert on leave from the Connecticut National Guard, fired his Gatling gun at the rectory. Then a white flag was unfurled. Howard's firing stopped, and several priests, nuns, women and children came across the lines. Finding the mission occupied only by civilians, Middleton brought his artillery out onto the ridge and began shelling the town. The soldiers began advancing past the church and got about half a kilometer before they came under heavy fire from both sides of the trail. The militia immediately took cover. Their enemies, hidden in well-constructed rifle pits, were invisible. One trooper later wrote, "Down some distance apart from each other, firing at nothing, making guess shots and hearing the rebel bullets zip all round you, and the everlasting clack as the bullets struck the trees." The now dismounted or irregular militia cavalry, Bolton's and French's scouts, were deployed on the right. The 10th Royal Grenadiers, militia infantry from Toronto, were in the center, with the 90th Winnipeg Rifles and Howard and his Gatling on the left, to protect the artillery. The infantry of the Midland Battalion, militia from Eastern Ontario, were kept in reserve near the church, which was now being used as a Canadian field hospital. A very dangerous situation developed when a group of Métis rushed the artillery. Only Howard's directing a heavy stream of Gatling fire at the attackers prevented a disaster. For these few minutes the frustrated soldiers got the only clear view of the MET's fighters that they were to have until the final moments of the battle. 3 days later, after the attack was repulsed, the artillery was pulled back a couple of 100 meters, and the infantry and dismounted scouts followed suit. The MET's then redeployed the men to try to outflank the militia, and heavy fighting ensued. Afternoon, the artillery was ordered forward again, and it began fruitlessly bombarding the invisible MET's rifle pits. The gunners were under heavy fire, in a very unsafe position. The Midlanders, who had been brought forward from the church, wanted to charge their unseen enemies, but were ordered not to by Middleton. Throughout, the Gatling gun was used to good effect, providing covering fire for the withdrawal of cannon that had come under sniper fire, and dispersing another attempt by Gabriel Dumont to capture the guns. Canadian advances saw less success but were carefully conducted, keeping casualties to a minimum. MET's attempt to surround the Canadian lines failed when the brushfires meant to screen the sortie failed to spread. At the end of the day, both sides held their positions at Mission Ridge, but Middleton, shaken by the fierce resistance, ordered the Canadian soldiers to retire to Estareba, a hastily improvised fortification about a mile from the MET's entrenchments, where the troops retired to sleep behind the network of improvised barricades. Probing attacks of the 10th of May to the 11th of May. On the 10th of May, Middleton established heavily defended gun pits and conducted a devastating, day-long shelling of the town. Attempted advances, however, were turned back by MET's fire, and no ground was gained. The next day, Middleton gauged the strength of the defenders by dispatching a contingent of men north along the enemy's flank while simultaneously conducting a general advance along the front. Having redirected a portion of the strength to hold the northward flank, the MET's lacked the manpower to oppose the Canadian thrust, ceding ground with little resistance. Canadian soldiers ventured as far as the Batoche cemetery before turning back. Satisfied with his enemy's weakness, Middleton retired to sleep and contended to take the town in the morning. The storming of Batoche. By the 12th of May, MET's defenses were in poor shape. Of the original defenders, 3/4 had either been wounded by artillery fire or were scattered and divided in the many clashes with the Canadians on the outskirts of the town. Those that still held their positions were fatigued and desperately short of ammunition. They resorted to hunting in the underbrush for bullets fired by government troops and firing them back, and some fired nails and rocks, forks and knives, instead of bullets, out of the rifles. Middleton's attack plan on this day was designed to mirror the success of the previous day's flanking feint, with one column drawing defenders away to the north and a second, under Colonel Bowen Van Straubenzee, assaulting the town directly. At first, on the morning of the 12th of May, Middleton's plan went awry. Van Straubenzee and his men did not attack, because the wind was blowing away from them and they did not hear the sound of the North Column's gunfire. Middleton, who had been with the North Column, returned to the camp in a rage because Van Straubenzee had not attacked. He shouted abuse at Van Straubenzee and the Canadian colonels, and stalked off to lunch. The previous night, some of the senior Canadian officers, exasperated by Middleton's caution, had discussed undertaking a charge. Now Van Straubenzee was more amenable to this as well. Afternoon, the Midlanders and Royal Grenadiers moved forward again, to a point near the Batoche cemetery. No one knows precisely who ordered the wild mass Canadian charge which now ensued. Firing at will, and cheering, the Midlanders and Grenadiers, aided by the Winnipeg 90th Rifles, rushed at the Métis.Fought rifle pits. Many of the Métis.Fought fighters were still out of position, having been drawn away from the cemetery and church to the northeast by Middleton's feint that morning. Ammunition on the Métis.Fought side was very low. Nevertheless, they resisted bravely, aided by sharpshooters firing from across the Saskatchewan River at the charging militiamen. However, the charge was irresistible. Middleton ordered the rest of the troops to assist by covering the flank of the charging men. Howard and his Gatling were moved up. The charging militia stormed into the village of Batoche. Then their enemies rallied. Métis and Indians who had been drawn away to the east by Middleton's feint in the morning now appeared, and commenced a heavy fire from rifle pits in brush near the village. A senior Canadian officer, Captain French, was killed as he fired from a second-story window, but the artillery and the Gatling were brought up to break this new resistance. The last defenders of Batoche surrendered. Straubenzie's soldiers had performed brilliantly, charging into Batoche in the face of heavy fire and driving the remaining Métis clear of the town. Middleton's plan, plus an impetuous charge by Canadian militia, had seen the last defenders overrun, and resistance at Batoche ended. Gallery. Aftermath. The Métis defeat at Batoche virtually ended the Northwest Rebellion. Louis Riel was captured. Gabriel Dumont fled to the United States, returning to Batoche only in 1893, and when he died, his body was buried there. Middleton's forces proceeded north to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and some portions were disbanded without delay and sent home in eastern Canada. Casualties. Middleton reported 8 deaths and 46 wounded on the Canadian side and 51 deaths and 173 wounded on the Métis side. Later, Father V. Greville reported that the Métis loss was not as high as the mission first reported to Middleton. There were 16 Métis killed and between 20 and 30 wounded. 9 of the Métis killed in the battle were buried in the cemetery of Batoche. 8 were in a common grave. Battle of Batoche. Following the battle, it is believed several Canadian soldiers from Ilbrick, Ontario, seized the bell from the Batoche church and took it back to Ontario as a prize. The fate of the bell became an issue of long-standing controversy, involving several Métis organizations and the provincial governments of Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Legacy. In the spring of 2008, Tourism, Parks, Culture and Sport Minister Christine Tell proclaimed in Duck Lake that the 125th commemoration, in 2010, of the 1885 Northwest Resistance is an excellent opportunity to tell the story of the Prairie Métis and First Nations peoples' struggle with government forces and how it has shaped Canada today. Batoche, where the Métis Provisional Government had been formed, has been declared a National Historic Site. Batoche marks the site of Gabriel Dumont's gravesite, Albert Caron's house, Batoche School, Batoche Cemetery, Letendre Store, Gabriel's River Crossing, Gardapi's Crossing, Batoche Crossing, Street, Antoine de Padour Church, Métis rifle pits, and Canadian Militia's battle camp. Maps. Military map. Battlefield of Batoche. Military map of Mission Ridge. Military map of Batoche. Military map of Batoche rifle pits. Photo collection.